My name is Elise Harrow. They thought they buried the truth with her, but I'm the one who handed the judge my parents' offshore accounts on a silver platter and watched my sister's fake tears dissolve under oath like sugar in hot tea. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because you're not going to believe what my own family did to me, starting in a funeral home of all places. It was suffocating in there. The funeral home smelled like lilies and lemon polish. The kind of smell that clings to grief and guilt and never lets go. I was sitting on the second pew in my black dress, numb, as the last words about my grandmother were read. Her name was Margaret Harrow, and she had been everything to me. Not perfect, but she was the one person who ever looked at me like I mattered more than the family name. I shouldn't have been surprised when the lawyer stepped forward, but the way he held the envelope like it was already scorched, that was my first clue. Per the last will and testament of Margaret Jane Harrow, he began, monotone as the air in the room stilled, the estate shall be distributed as follows. I barely heard the first parts. My mother and father, Elaine and Richard Harrow, received generous trust allocations. My sister, Corinne, rolled her eyes as if she'd expected more than just liquid assets. Then he said it. To Elise Harrow, the lawyer glanced at me. His mouth barely moved. The testator leaves full ownership of the property located at 11 Wexley Hill Lane. Wait, just the house. No mention of the family company, none of the stocks. Not even the antique ring my grandmother once promised would be mine on my wedding day. I blinked. That's it? I asked, voice thin. The house. Corinne let out a loud, fake cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. My father didn't even look at me, just tilted his head slightly, like the matter was settled. And my mother. She patted my arm with a look that could sour cream. The lawyer cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. No, I said louder. That's impossible. She told me everything was meant for me. She told me so the last time I saw her. That was before the will was finalized, my father said coolly. Apparently she changed her mind. Don't patronize me. My voice cracked, but I held my ground. I want to see the will, the actual document. The room tensed. Elise, the lawyer began, it's standard protocol. No, it's not, I snapped. You read it out loud, now let me read it in print. My father and the lawyer exchanged a look. A short, sharp glance that sliced through the silence like a scalpel. You're not a beneficiary of any financial assets, Elise, my father said. You got the house, let's not make a scene. But I was already on my feet. A scene? You think I care about appearances right now? You're lying, she wouldn't do this. Not to me. Corinne stood up beside me, arms crossed. Oh, here we go, Elise being dramatic again, can't just let things go and move on. My blood was boiling now. Don't you dare. People were turning in their seats. Whispers, gasps. I turned back to the lawyer. You're a legal representative, you know you're obligated to provide the will if a direct heir asks, so I'm asking. I'm afraid, he began slowly, I can't hand it over today. Why not? More silence. Corinne smirked. Maybe because it's none of your business, little sister. That did it. I have every right to see that will, and I will not be dismissed in front of people mourning a woman who loved me more than she ever loved this circus of a family. It was loud. It echoed. The minister whispered something to the assistant. A few guests awkwardly shuffled toward the exits. My mother hissed my name under her breath. You're ruining this, she spat. She's already gone, I whispered. The only thing left is the truth. And apparently none of you can look me in the eye when you lie. The room fell completely still. Funeral over. Scene complete. And I walked out of that suffocating chapel before they could drag me into the next act of their rehearsed betrayal. The rain had been falling all day, soft and steady, the kind of drizzle that made the streets shine like spilled ink under the diner's neon lights. I sat across from Kayla in our usual corner booth at Hargrove's, an old-school spot we'd been coming to since middle school. Waitress had stopped asking if we wanted pie. She just brought 2 slices of apple with extra whipped cream and refilled our coffees like clockwork. I didn't touch mine. They looked relieved, I muttered, tracing a circle in the condensation on my water glass. Not sad, not even surprised, just satisfied, like they pulled it off. Kayla leaned forward, brows drawn. Because they did pull it off, Elise. You saw the way your dad and that lawyer exchanged glances like it was rehearsed. I swallowed hard. She told me she was leaving everything to me, not just once, repeatedly. She said I was the only one she trusted not to sell off her legacy like it was a yard sale. Kayla rested her hand on mine, and she meant it, but something changed and it wasn't her heart. A beat passed. Then I whispered, "What if they forged it?" Kayla didn't flinch. "I wouldn't put it past them," she said. "You've told me enough stories about your dad's shady business deals and Kareen's creative morality." "She lied to me at the funeral," I said, voice barely above a breath. Straight to my face like it was nothing. "Kareen used to at least try to be subtle. She's gotten lazy, probably didn't think you'd fight back." I stared out the rain-specked window, watching drops crawl down the glass like they were racing each other to the ledge. "The house," I said. "Why give me the house?" Kayla's eyes narrowed. "Because they didn't want it. Or because it's the one thing they couldn't bury." Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. "They wanted it all," I whispered. "But they gave me that house." "Why?" Kayla sat back, crossing her arms. "Maybe that house is the start of something they don't want you to find." The words hung in the air like steam off coffee. "I don't know what I'm even supposed to look for," I admitted. "I haven't been inside since before she passed. Last time I was there, the upstairs hall smelled like mildew and the roof leaked onto her knitting chair." "That just means they think you'll give up," Kayla said. "Let the place rot, sell it for scrap, move on." "I almost didn't fight it," I confessed. "When they read the will, I felt like a little kid again. Powerless, outnumbered, like no one would believe me even if I screamed." Kayla's voice softened. "But you didn't scream, you stood up, you left on your terms, that takes guts." I gave a weak laugh. "And now I'm sitting in a diner eating sadness pie, wondering if I'm going crazy." "You're not," she said fiercely. "They stole something, I can feel it." We sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds were the rain tapping the glass and the clink of forks on plates from a nearby table. I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck. "You know what she said to me once?" I asked. "My grandma." We were drinking sweet tea on the porch and watching the sunset over the marsh. "She said, Elise, one day you'll need to walk through something dark. When you do, don't just look for a light. Look for the match I left you." Kayla's mouth parted. "You think she meant—" "I don't know, but she never spoke in riddles without a reason." A shadow of resolve passed over Kayla's face. "Then let's find it," I blinked. "Find what?" "The match," she said. "Whatever she left behind, secrets don't stay buried forever, not in houses like that." A pause. "Come with me," I said, the words slipping out before I could overthink them. "Tomorrow, I'll pick up the keys from the lawyer's office and we'll go. Just you and me." Kayla reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'll bring gloves," she said, "and a flashlight." Outside, the rain kept falling. But for the first time in days, something inside me stopped sinking. I didn't know what I would find in that crumbling house on Wexley Hill, but I knew who'd be standing beside me when I opened the door. The house on Wexley Hill had been dying quietly for years. At first, I thought I could just sweep the floors and repaint the walls. Maybe replace some siding. What I didn't expect was for the basement to flood the first time it rained, or for a family of raccoons to be living in the attic insulation, or the slow, gutting realization that the structure had been neglected just long enough to require almost everything short of demolition. But I didn't walk away. I pulled on work gloves. I learned to wield a crowbar. I watched tutorials at night and rented tools I couldn't name 3 months earlier. Every weekend I drove out to that old colonial, opened the swollen front door with a creak that sounded like a ghost's exhale, and worked until my back gave out or the sun dipped too low behind the trees. It became my church, my rebellion, my quiet war. "You should sell it," my mother had sniffed over Sunday dinner. "Someone could bulldoze it and build something livable." "Or haunted," Kareen added, not looking up from her wine glass. "That place'll collapse before it earns a dime," my father said, laughing. "Maybe we should have left you the boat instead." I didn't flinch. "Maybe," I said, calmly placing my fork on my napkin, "but I'd rather restore something honest than live off lies." The table went quiet. For once, no one had a comeback. After that night, I stopped updating them altogether. What they didn't know was that each moldy floorboard I replaced, every beam I braced or window I recocked, it felt like peeling away the layers they had buried her under. The lies, the neglect, the rot. The house was my only inheritance. But it was hers and she had loved it once. So I would love it now, even if it killed me. By month 6, I'd sold my grandmother's old Buick to cover the cost of a new roof. I started waking up at 5 a.m. to check contractor reviews, reaching out to every local crew with decent reputations. Most gave me outrageous quotes. Some didn't call back at all. Then came Jonah. "Lakeside Restorations," his voicemail said, "We bring the bones back to life." He looked like someone who could have played rhythm guitar in a 90s garage band, faded flannel, crow's feet from sun squints, hands permanently stained by varnish. But he didn't talk down to me. He didn't upsell me either. "You do the demo yourself?" he asked, stepping over a pile of cracked tile. I nodded. Damn respect, most people would have quit at the smell alone. He offered a fair bid. Said it'd be tight but doable. I signed with him the next day. The work finally began to speed up. Slowly, the sagging house began to shift back to something almost upright. Jonah brought in his small crew, quiet, careful men who whistled while they worked and treated the house like it mattered. We found small things. A broken pocket watch behind a wall, a silver hairpin under the floorboards, a yellowed recipe card for apple cake tucked into the chimney masonry. Nothing important, but I saved them all like relics as if they might whisper something she'd forgotten to say. I started sleeping better, smiling more. It wasn't healing exactly, but it was something like peace. Until the call. It was a Wednesday, late spring. The walls had finally been drywalled, primed, and waiting for paint. I was at work, eating lunch in the parking lot when my phone rang. "Jonah." "Ma'am," he said, voice low and clipped. "I need you to come out here right away." I sat up straighter. "Did something collapse? Is it mold?" "No, nothing like that." A pause. "But don't tell your parents, or your sister, you hear me?" "What, why?" "Elise," he rarely used my name. "Just get out here, bring your keys." He hung up. I sat there a full minute, staring at the black screen, and then my heart began to pound. By the time I reached Wexley Hill, my knuckles had turned white on the steering wheel. I hadn't waited. I left my office, ignored my manager's raised brow, and drove through every red light that turned yellow a second too early. Jonah didn't rattle easily. He'd once worked straight through an electrical fire without losing his cool. But he'd sounded off, careful, afraid. When I turned the corner, I slammed the brakes. There were 3 squad cars parked crookedly in front of the house. Flashing lights. Yellow barricade of police tape stretched from the old oak tree to the porch railing. I sat frozen behind the windshield, heart galloping. No fire, no visible damage, but this wasn't just a code violation. As I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunched under my boots. My legs felt like wires pulled too tight. A uniformed officer, mid-30s, square jaw, not unfriendly, intercepted me on the front walk. "Name, please?" he asked, clipboard in hand. "Elise Harrow," I said, my voice cracked. I own the property. Do you have ID on you?" "Yes." I fumbled in my purse, nearly dropping my wallet. "What's going on?" "I got a call, just protocol," he said calmly. "We're not releasing details yet. Do you know a Jonah Rivers?" "Yes, he's the foreman. He's inside." He gestured to the porch. "He said you'd be coming." I slipped past the tape with his nod, the boards under my feet groaning like they always did. The door stood half open. The smell hit me instantly, not smoke, not rot. Something earthy, metallic. Old. Jonah met me in the foyer, his usual smirk replaced with a furrowed brow and dust smudged across his jaw. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Not until you tell me what's happening." He nodded toward the fireplace. "Follow me." The house was still unfinished, no furniture, tools scattered, but the room beyond the foyer looked different. The bricks above the hearth had been partially removed, some of them stacked neatly on a tarp. Behind them, a narrow gap had been pried open. Jonah led me to it, then paused. "You said your grandma trusted you, right?" I nodded slowly. "With everything." "Then I think she left this for you." He stepped aside, my breath caught. Behind the bricks, nestled in what must have been a hidden alcove, was a wooden chest. Not ornate but solid, worn with time. Dark cherry wood, brass corners dulled with age, and a rusted padlock snapped open beside it. It had already been pulled out and set on the tarp. "She built a false back behind the hearth," Jonah said. "One of my guys noticed airflow where there shouldn't be any. We thought maybe rodents until he found this." A second officer stood nearby, glancing over as Jonah spoke. He didn't interrupt, but he was listening. "What's in it?" I whispered. Jonah shook his head. "Didn't open it, that's not for me." I stepped closer. My hands trembled as I crouched beside it. The wood was warm from the sun filtering through the dusty windows. There were faint initials carved into the underside of the lid: MJH, Margaret Jane Harrow. "She hid it," I said, barely breathing. "Not by accident, she wanted it to be found, but only by someone she trusted enough to come looking." Jonah crouched beside me, lowering his voice. "Elise, listen, I didn't call the cops. One of my guys called it in before I could stop him. He thought it might be evidence, money, old guns, whatever. They're not charging anyone with anything yet." But they're asking a lot of questions. What kind of questions? About your parents and about you. I felt the color drain from my face. But you didn't open it, I said. So how? I didn't, but when they brought in the detective, he pried the lid open right here. He nodded at the open chest. And, I whispered. Jonah's eyes flicked toward the officer again, then back to me. There's an envelope inside, sealed with your name on it. My knees buckled. Elise, he said, catching my arm. Whatever's in there, it's already changing things. So be careful, don't tell anyone you don't trust. And whatever you do, don't leave this house alone tonight. The chest sat like an accusation in the middle of my lawyer's desk. It looked smaller in the office's warm lamplight, but no less heavy. My attorney, Walter Eames, a silver-bearded man with the patience of a monk, studied it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for court exhibits. I've already cleared this with the local PD, he said. Technically, they have no claim. The property is yours, and unless the contents are proven to be criminal in nature, you have full rights to examine them. I nodded, fingers clenched tightly in my lap. She left it for me, I know she did. Walter gave me a long, measured look. Then he unlatched the lid. Inside, on top of carefully wrapped bundles of yellowing documents, was a thick envelope. Cream-colored, the paper dry with age. Across the front, in unmistakable looping script, for Elise only. Walter hesitated. Do you want me to step out while you read it? I shook my head. No, if what I think is in here, I may need a witness. He nodded once. I slid the envelope from its resting place and peeled back the seal. My hands trembled, but I kept them steady enough to unfold the letter. The ink had faded in places, but my grandmother's writing was still unmistakable, neat, deliberate, slightly slanted from her arthritic hand. My sweet Elise, if you're reading this, then I suppose the people around you have already made you feel alone. I am so sorry. I wanted to protect you in life, but what I couldn't say then, I've written now. There are things about our family I tried for years to deny. Things I hoped could be corrected with love and time. But time doesn't change some people, it just teaches them how to lie better. Your parents, Elise, they've been taking money from the family business for over 2 decades. Quietly. Strategically. Hidden through offshore accounts I only discovered after your grandfather passed. When I confronted them, they told me to stay in my lane. Your father even tried to declare me mentally unfit. Said I was confused, but I was never confused about you. You were the only one who saw me, who never flinched when I told the truth. That's why I left you the house. I couldn't trust the others, but I knew if something ever happened you'd come looking. In the chest you'll find documents. Ledgers, copies. Proof of everything. Use them, Elise. Not to destroy them, but to stop them for both our sakes. And if you ever wonder whether you're strong enough for this, just remember, strength runs in your blood, but so does truth. All my love, Grandma. By the time I finished, tears blurred the last line. Walter remained silent, allowing me the moment. She knew, I whispered. All this time, and they tried to gaslight her. He reached for the lid again. Shall we see what else she left behind? I nodded. Together we began to unpack the chest. Inside were meticulously kept ledgers wrapped in cloth, folders labeled with foreign bank names, printed wire transfers, and one small black notebook, its pages filled with handwritten annotations, all in Grandma's tidy script. Walter leafed through a few pages and let out a low breath. This is substantial, he said. It's enough to launch a case, isn't it? He closed the book slowly, setting it aside with care. It's enough to bury them, Elise. But that wasn't what I wanted, not yet. I don't want to bury anyone, I said. I want the truth brought to light. I want what she asked me to do. Walter nodded slowly, then looked me dead in the eye. Then we start, quietly. The next morning the sun broke through the clouds like it had something to prove. I sat in Walter's office again, sleeves rolled up, eyes burning from too little sleep. But I didn't care. All I could think about were the names on those ledgers, the dates, the amounts, the locations. Year after year of siphoned money, all neatly recorded in Grandma's unforgiving hand. It wasn't just numbers, it was betrayal with a decimal point. There's enough here to make federal agents sit up straight, Walter said, flipping through a ledger with gloves. Shell companies, Cayman accounts. Some of these transfers are recent. I nodded, clutching the edges of the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. And the photos, I added quietly. Walter met my eyes. You sure you want to include those? They show intent, I said. My mother laughing with the board accountant, my father's signature on the consulting fees approval form for a company that doesn't even exist, my sister at the bank in Zurich. Walter closed the folder slowly. And the letter from your grandmother? Attached as affidavit, I said. Just not yet. I want it in the record only when it counts. He gave a small, approving nod. You're serious about this? She trusted me, she left me everything, and they laughed in my face. I paused, my breath shallow. File it all, I said, my voice steadier than it had any right to be. Quietly, let them stay comfortable a little longer. He leaned back. That may be the most dangerous thing you've said all day. I left the office that afternoon with copies secured, a burner phone in my pocket, and a quiet fire burning in my chest. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was purpose. But they weren't going to give me peace. That night, as I pulled into the driveway of my temporary rental house, I saw the silhouettes waiting on my porch, backlit by the yellow glow of the porch light. My parents. Elaine stood with her arms crossed, as composed as ever. My father, Richard, gave a casual wave like this was a neighborly drop-in and not a warning in disguise. I didn't bother pretending to be surprised. You're a little far from your glass castle, I said, unlocking the door with deliberate slowness. Elaine smiled, her lips barely moving. We thought it was time for a chat. You're not coming inside, I said, blocking the doorway. We raised you better than this, Richard added, that patronizing calm creeping into his voice. You raised me to be silent, I corrected. There's a difference. Elaine stepped forward, too close. Whatever game you think you're playing, Elise, don't forget we made you. I stared at her for a long moment, pulse thudding in my ears. Maybe you did, I said quietly. But she unmade you. Elaine's eyes narrowed. Richard shifted, glancing at the window like someone might be listening. You want to go to war with your own blood, he asked. I'm not going to war, I said. I'm just letting the truth walk out the front door. Whether it drags you with it is entirely up to you. For a beat, no one spoke. Then Elaine exhaled through her nose, calm cracking just slightly. You don't know what you're doing. You'd be surprised. Richard stepped in, lowering his voice. If you think exposing us will earn you anything, think again. You have no power here, not really. I met his gaze, steady. I have Grandma's name, her documents, her voice. I paused. And I have time, something you're clearly running out of. I closed the door. And this time, they didn't stop me. It only took 3 days for the warning to turn into a message. I'd parked my car outside the municipal building. Broad daylight downtown, meters lined with SUVs and sedans. I was inside for 40 minutes tops. When I came back out, the space was empty, just a rectangle of dry pavement where my car had been. At first, I thought maybe I'd misremembered. Checked the next row, then the next. Walked in wider circles until I knew I wasn't wrong. Gone, not towed, not booted, just gone. By the time the officer arrived, I was standing beside the empty curb, arms folded tight, phone clenched in my fist. You're sure you locked it? He asked, tapping notes into his tablet. Yes, I said. I double-checked. It's a newer model. Keyless. The alarm was active. Any recent disputes? I didn't hesitate. My family. He glanced up, eyebrows raised. As in someone you live with. As in someone who doesn't want me talking to people like you. The words came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't apologize. I filed the report. Gave them the make, model, plate, last known location. I asked about street cams. We'll request the footage, he said. But 2 days later, when I followed up, I got a call from a different officer. I'm sorry, Ms. Harrow, he said. We've been informed the footage from that block is unavailable, corrupted during a recent software update. I sat in silence for a second. Corrupted? Yes. Unfortunately, it happens. No backup, a pause. Not in this case. Of course not. I hung up, walked into my bathroom, and splashed water on my face like that would somehow slow the spiral tightening around me. I knew what this was. It wasn't about the car. It was about reminding me that I was still reachable. That even in daylight on a busy street, they could touch something I needed and make it disappear without consequence. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I called Walter. He picked up on the third ring, but something in his voice was wrong. Walter, I said, frowning. Are you okay? He cleared his throat. I'm sorry, Elise, I've been meaning to call. My stomach dropped. What happened? Another pause, then finally he said it. I've been threatened. The silence that followed was deafening. I can't prove it, he continued. No phone calls, just a letter slipped under my door, and this morning, his voice wavered. My tires were slashed, Elise, at my home, in my driveway. Call the police. I have grandchildren. That was all he said, but I understood. You're pulling out, I said quietly. I've already emailed a list of referrals, colleagues who are excellent, Some have handled federal cases, but I can't continue, I'm sorry. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It's okay, I lied, I understand. After we hung up, I sat alone on the floor of my living room, knees drawn up, heart pounding. They were escalating, no more subtle digs or veiled threats. Now they were burning bridges, making people afraid, turning my allies into liabilities. I picked up my phone again, hands trembling. There was only one name I could call now. Kayla, she answered before the second ring. You okay? She asked, voice alert with concern. I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, I said, they took my car, my lawyer quit, and the police can't or won't help, her breath caught. Okay, she said after a beat. Then it's my turn. What? You forget I'm in law school, she said, her tone sharpening. I may not be licensed yet, but I know how to dig, and I'm not afraid of your family. I closed my eyes, a new kind of relief spilling over me. You'll be risking everything, I whispered. There was steel in her voice when she answered. Then let's make sure it's worth it. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. Kayla stayed over, hunched at my kitchen table until nearly 3 a.m., poring over documents, marking arguments, prepping responses. Her laptop glowed like a torch in the dark, and she moved through my grandmother's ledgers with the precision of someone who understood what was at stake, not just legally, but personally. They built this case on fear, she murmured at one point. Fear that no one would believe you, fear that you'd walk away, but not anymore. I watched her highlight a section of the ledger. You're not even licensed yet, I said softly. She looked up. So, you think that matters to me, a beat. Kayla, if no one else will fight, she said, eyes burning, then I will. We arrived at the courthouse just before noon. It was colder inside than it should have been, marble floors, fluorescent lighting, and the sharp echo of heels clicking down the corridor. My parents were already seated when we entered the courtroom. Elaine wore a soft gray suit, understated but elegant. Richard sat beside her, arms folded, face unreadable. Corrine wasn't with them. Her absence didn't comfort me. The judge, a man I hadn't seen before, was already reviewing the file when we approached the bench. Judge Lathrop, silver hair, piercing eyes. His reputation, Kayla had warned me, was mixed. Sharp on procedural law. Suspicious of whistleblowers. He barely looked at me as he called the case. Ms. Harrow, you've brought accusations of financial misconduct, embezzlement, and fraud against your parents, he said, flipping through the evidence binder. Serious charges. Kayla stepped forward. Your Honor, we have substantial documentation recovered from the plaintiff's inherited property records from the decedent Margaret Harrow, who explicitly detailed the financial abuses committed. You're not an attorney, he interrupted, not unkindly. You shouldn't be speaking in court. Kayla froze. Her cheeks flushed, but she stepped back. I swallowed and took her place. My hands shook slightly as I held the mic. I'm here because no one else would speak for her, I said. My grandmother discovered something my family wanted hidden. She entrusted me with the truth. Judge Lathrop lifted an eyebrow. And you brought this to the police. They passed it to the local financial crimes unit, I replied. But I was told these things take time. I couldn't wait. My safety was compromised. My attorney quit after being threatened. I was forced to act. He closed the folder slowly. The court has reviewed the documents, however, he paused. We also received a formal counterclaim this morning from your parents, alleging defamation, fraud, falsified documents, conspiracy to extort. My stomach dropped. What? Elaine remained stone-faced in the gallery. Richard blinked slowly, like he was watching a mildly interesting play. Judge Lathrop folded his hands. I've read both claims. And I find the plaintiff's story, however emotionally compelling, legally unsupported. Kayla shot to her feet. Your Honor, the evidence, he silenced her with a glance. I'm ruling in favor of the defendants, he said. The court finds grounds to proceed with charges of defamation and fraudulent misrepresentation. Bailiff, detain Ms. Harrow for processing. No, I breathed. The room spun. Kayla grabbed my arm as the bailiff approached. This isn't legal, I said, louder now. I have proof. And finally looked at me. Blank, cold, triumphant. Turn around, ma'am, the bailiff instructed. I locked eyes with Kayla. They rigged it, I whispered. They rigged everything. I know, she said, voice shaking. But this isn't over, I swear to you. As the cuffs clicked around my wrists, I looked over my shoulder one last time and saw my parents, expressionless, like they'd already won. The cuffs were cold, heavier than they looked. They'd barely clicked shut when I found my voice again. This isn't legal. I shouted, twisting toward the judge. I have proof. You can't just silence me. The bailiff gripped my arm, firm but not cruel. Ma'am, please, but I wasn't done. You're protecting them, I yelled. They stole from my grandmother, from me. This whole thing is rigged. I could feel Kayla at my side, trying to speak, her voice drowned beneath the rising commotion. My parents hadn't moved, still seated, still watching. Richard with his chin slightly raised, and Elaine with that maddening calm, like this was all part of their plan. Then bang! The double courtroom doors slammed open. A gust of cool air swept through the chamber. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-breath, and in walked 6 people in dark suits, purposeful, fast, no hesitation. Federal agents. Gasps rippled through the room. The one in front, a silver-haired man with the steady eyes of someone who's seen the worst and lived through it, strode directly toward the bench, holding up his badge as he moved. Judge Lathrop, he said, voice cutting through the stunned silence, you are under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to suppress federal investigation. The judge actually laughed. A sharp, incredulous sound. Excuse me. The agent didn't flinch. Your Honor, he said tightly, we have documented wire transfers, witness testimony, and recordings linking you to at least 3 prior dismissals involving the Harrow family. Step down from the bench. The entire courtroom erupted at once. Voices, movement, chairs scraping. The bailiff released me like I'd burned him. I turned toward Kayla, wide-eyed, but she was already watching the scene unfold with her mouth slightly open. Lathrop stood, trembling now, not with fear but fury. You have no jurisdiction. We do now, the agent said. The Department of Justice issued a warrant this morning. He nodded to one of the agents behind him. In seconds, the judge's arms were pulled behind his back, cuffed in the very same metal they'd clapped onto me. I want my counsel, he barked, red-faced. You'll get one, the agent replied coolly. But first you'll answer for what you buried in this courtroom. For the first time, I saw Judge Lathrop's composure crack. Aline stood up fast, her voice sharp. There's been a mistake, but the agent turned to her. Elaine Harrow, he said, eyes locking with hers. Please remain seated, we'll be speaking with you next. She froze mid-step. Richard slowly reached for her arm, guiding her back into the bench. I stood there, wrists still shackled but forgotten, heart pounding so hard I could feel it behind my teeth. The silver-haired agent finally looked at me. Elise Harrow, I nodded slowly. I need to speak with you, he said gently. Privately, I've waited a long time for this. Then he turned to the bailiff and added, remove the cuffs. The metal slid off my wrists with a quiet click. For a moment I just stood there, blinking. Dazed. Kayla slipped beside me, whispering, did that just happen? I could only nod. She gripped my arm. Elise, I think your grandmother left more than just paperwork. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Thinner, charged. 100 feet behind me, reporters scrambled like wasps around the front steps. I could hear the buzz of their voices, cameras flashing, names being shouted. Judge Lathrop, Harrow family, embezzlement, cover-up. But I wasn't walking down those steps. I was led through a side exit, down a quiet corridor, and into an unmarked sedan with dark windows. The silver-haired agent, who hadn't introduced himself yet, drove in silence. I didn't speak either. Not until we pulled up to a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat 2 blocks from the courthouse. Cozy, quiet. A single couple sat in the back sipping iced tea. The waitress looked up, recognized him, and nodded. He led me to a corner booth without asking, slid into the seat across from me. Coffee? He asked. I blinked. I'm sorry, but who are you? He gave a soft smile. Agent Mark Easton, FBI Financial Crimes Division, officially. I tilted my head. And unofficially. He paused, then folded his hands on the table. I was also your grandmother's lover, he said. The words didn't land right away. My thoughts stuttered, trying to arrange them into something that made sense. Excuse me. It was brief, he continued, voice low and calm. But real. I met Margaret Jane Harrow in 1992. She was married. I was too. It wasn't about stealing each other away. We just found each other in a moment where we were both drowning. He glanced down at the table, then back up at me. She ended it after 6 months, said she couldn't risk dragging anyone else into the family's mess. But we stayed in contact, quietly. She'd call from time to time, ask questions about tax codes, offshore entities I didn't press. I knew she was building something. I could hardly breathe. You were watching her, he nodded. And later, watching you. The waitress set down 2 cups of coffee. Neither of us touched them. I didn't know what she left behind until about a year ago, Mark said. She sent me a sealed file 2 months before she passed, said if anything happened, if the will looked wrong, if the house went to you and only the house, I'd know it was time. I shook my head slowly, heart thudding. She knew they'd come after me, I said. She counted on you not backing down. He pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket. Cream-colored, faded. I wasn't supposed to give this to you unless you made it this far. I took it from him, hands trembling again. The seal broke easily. Inside was a single index card, my grandmother's handwriting. If he brings you this, you've done what I couldn't. Trust him. Ask him what he never told me. I looked up. What didn't you tell her? Mark leaned forward. She asked me once if she could trust the law to protect you after she was gone, he said. I didn't answer. I knew then what I know now. The law doesn't always work for people like her. Or for girls like you, not when power gets passed down like property deeds. He reached into his pocket again and slid over a worn photograph. My grandmother, younger, laughing, and beside her him, his hand resting just barely on her back. You're not just someone I'm helping, he said, voice thickening. Your family, Elise. I stared at him. Something inside me shifted. You're my grandfather, I whispered. He didn't deny it. I didn't know what to say. I stared down at the worn photograph of my grandmother, and the man now sitting across from me, Mark Easton, the FBI agent who just said he was more than that. That he was mine. Something about the curve of his jaw, the shape of his brow, I had noticed it in the courtroom but hadn't let myself linger on the familiarity. Now I couldn't unsee it. My hands, shaky and unsure, reached for my phone. There was a photo I'd taken earlier that week, me and my husband, Dean, standing outside the courthouse on a sunny day before the hearing, when we still believed the system would work. I wasn't smiling in the photo, but the light had caught my face just right. I zoomed in and turned the screen toward Mark. Look, he leaned forward. My nose, my eyes, the way the brow creases, I said. We look alike. Mark didn't speak at first, just looked. Then he exhaled, long and steady. I always suspected, he said. She never said it outright, never claimed anything, but the timeline, the way she protected you so fiercely. There was a part of her that was always afraid if people knew they'd take you from her or worse, make you choose. My voice was barely a whisper. You're not just her old flame, you're my mother's father. He nodded once slowly. Which makes me your grandfather, Elise. Everything inside me tilted. For most of my life, I'd felt like a borrowed thing. Floating. Disconnected. My parents raised me with cold calculation, always treating me like a piece on a board rather than a daughter. But this man who'd stepped in when I was most alone, who had watched quietly, who now looked at me like I mattered, he hadn't asked for a place in my life. He'd waited until I asked for him, and now I needed proof. I want a DNA test, I said. Mark smiled faintly. Already started the process. You'll get confirmation within 72 hours. We had a sample from your grandmother's estate file, enough to match first-degree lineage. I blinked. You were that sure? No, he said softly. I just hoped. 3 days later, I stood in Walter's old office, now handed over to a colleague of his, a woman named Julia Patel, while Kayla read the lab report aloud. Probability of grandparent-grandchild relationship, 99.94%, she said, her voice trembling. I sat very still. It was real. He was mine. Mark Easton, veteran agent, whistleblower, quiet guardian, was my biological grandfather. Julia looked up from her desk, brows furrowed. This changes a lot. It changes everything, Kayla said. Legally, it gave us a new avenue. With the confirmation of biological lineage, I could petition for a deeper audit of the will and challenge its authenticity on the grounds of inheritance manipulation, especially now that we had proof of corruption, coercion, and suppressed assets. It wasn't just about what my grandmother left me anymore. It was about what had been stolen from me, from her, and from the truth. When we left the office, Mark was waiting outside in the hallway. He stood when I approached, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I got the results, I said. He didn't ask what they said. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and for the first time in my adult life, I hugged someone who had waited years just to be allowed to care. And he held me like he'd never let go. It didn't happen overnight. It took 6 long months, 2 separate trials, and enough legal paperwork to wallpaper every room in the estate. But in the end, justice didn't just knock. It kicked the door down. My parents were both found guilty. Elaine on all counts, fraud, falsifying financial records, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Richard tried to cut a last-minute deal by offering names of other partners, but it wasn't enough to save him. The judge's ruling was swift and cold. They were sentenced within the same week. Minimum security prisons, ironically still too generous considering what they stole, not just from me, but from the employees they defrauded, the trust they destroyed. I wasn't in the courtroom for the sentencing. I didn't need to see them handcuffed again. I'd already said goodbye to the idea that they were my parents months earlier. But I was there when the business, Harrow Heritage Holdings, was officially signed over to me. Ink hadn't even dried when Kayla burst into happy tears. "You did it," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "You brought it full circle." "No," I said quietly, "we did it." She squeezed my hand. Mark, my grandfather, stood to the side watching. He didn't interfere, he never tried to take credit, but I could see it in his eyes, pride and a kind of wonder. He had missed so much, but he'd stayed just close enough to step in when I needed him most. And now he finally stood with me. Openly. As family, the house on Wexley Hill, once falling apart, full of silence and secrets, was finally finished. Painted warm white with navy shutters, the porch refinished, the garden blooming just as Grandma used to keep it. And tonight, for the first time in years, it was filled with laughter. We hosted a quiet dinner. No media. No pretense. Just the people who had stayed when everything fell apart. Kayla brought dessert, her famous salted caramel pie. Dean grilled salmon on the back patio, while Mark told a story about my grandmother trying to learn how to ride a motorcycle in her 50s. Even Julia, my new attorney, stopped by for a drink and smiled like she'd been waiting to exhale this whole time. And me, I set the table with Grandma's china. I'd found it tucked in a crate behind the pantry wall, safely packed, labeled in her handwriting, for the future if she ever needs it. I hadn't understood what it was then, but I did now. This moment, this home, this table. After everyone had eaten and the last of the pie was gone, Kayla raised her glass. "To the woman who started it all," she said, "to Margaret Harrow." We all echoed her. Mark's hand brushed mine under the table. "And to the woman who finished what she started," he added softly, "to Elise." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, not from grief this time, but from peace. From knowing that the house, our house, wasn't a grave for secrets anymore. It was a beginning. 5 years later, I still wake up early. Sometimes it's habit. Other times it's memory, the echo of courtroom fluorescent lights, the sound of handcuffs clicking into place. But mostly it's purpose. This morning I stood on the porch of the old house, now fully restored and reborn as something my grandmother would have been proud of. The Margaret J. Harrow Center for Justice and Creative Renewal. We call it the Chest, as a quiet nod to where it all began. The building is no longer just a home. It's a sanctuary, part legal clinic, part art collective. The front parlor houses easels and clay wheels, the sunroom now a reading lounge lined with second-hand law books and poetry. Upstairs, private therapy rooms and quiet corners where women meet with attorneys, volunteers, or just breathe for the first time in months. I no longer sleep in the master bedroom. That belongs to the center now. I live in the guest house out back, close enough to stay connected, but far enough to know that this legacy is bigger than me. This morning, we hosted our 5th annual brunch for survivors of wrongful conviction, family estrangement, and financial abuse. The backyard was a tangle of folding chairs, warm scones, and honest stories. And as I helped stack empty cups near the garden gate, a young journalist from the Boston Globe approached, voice hesitant. "Ms. Harrow," she said, flipping her notebook open, "do you mind if I ask one last question?" I smiled. "Go ahead." She tapped her pen nervously. "After everything, after losing your family, fighting the court, nearly going to prison yourself, what kept you going when everyone turned against you?" I didn't need to think. I looked out toward the magnolia tree we planted for Grandma the year after the trial. Its blossoms had just begun to open. Then I turned back to the reporter and said softly, "When the world lies to you, the truth becomes your greatest weapon." She blinked, then nodded slowly, scribbling the words down like they mattered, which they did, because they weren't just words. They were lived, fought for, paid in trust, tears, and every friendship I nearly lost along the way. Behind us, I could hear Kayla laughing near the back patio, still running the nonprofit's legal workshops on weekends between big firm cases. Mark, Grandpa, was in the library showing a nervous teenager how to file their first FOIA request. Dean waved from the kitchen window, flour in his hair, rolling out crust for the pies we now sell to fund scholarships. This wasn't the life I thought I'd build. It was better, more honest, more earned. I turned to head back inside, my heels echoing on the same wood porch that once trembled beneath secrets and shame. Now, it held only strength, and stories, and truth.